Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Really been looking forward to this one. We're going to be talking about job sharing and mental health in general for remote workers and specifically in post-production. Big thanks to Screen Ireland and Screen Wexford for having us and facilitating. This evening at 7 p.m. I'll be talking to Ben Folks about working in the cloud and all sorts of geeky, techie things, and kind of the future of post, which is also exciting. But being here right now is exciting as well. So, also have to mention we have our in-person event at the Gorey School of Art tomorrow, which is going to be great. There is at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A function thing. If you want to pop a question in as we go, we'll be glancing at those. And I believe you can upvote the questions as well. Today joining us, we have Michelle Reynolds, who is the co-director of ReelTime Media. She began her career in Factual and Entertainment TV, 17 years as a producer and director in the UK and US. She currently serves as a high-end TV manager for ScreenSkills. She joined Share My Telly Job in 2018, running a not-for-profit to promote job sharing and retain talented, experienced and diverse freelancers in the industry, and is the founding officer of the Unscripted TV Union, which is part of Bectu in the UK. And there was a lot there. We're going to delve into what ReelTime Media does with Michelle in a moment. We also have Sinead O'Brien, who's an award-winning producer, director, writer, and non-fiction author with 25 years plus experience in the industry. She's collaborated with many organisations such as Screen Ireland, BBC, Sky Arts, Northern Ireland Screen, Virgin, RC Media, TG Caja, the list goes on. Very experienced. And has co-authored two critically acclaimed non-fiction books, Left for Dead and Striking Back. Since 2023, she's been focusing on writing and directing drama. There we have the intros. Good afternoon. It's fantastic to see you, Michelle and Sinead. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks so much for having us, Joe.
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe we could start with you, Michelle. Then, could you share with us what ReelTime Media does and your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So ReelTime Media, we're a training and consultancy company working specifically with film and TV. And our whole ethos is about the practice of good work. And what that means is fair hours for fair pay and the promotion of flexible working with the hope of creating a workforce that is happy and healthy and inclusive. And a big part of what we do is promote job sharing as the most practical form of building any kind of work-life balance, flexible working into our crazy TV and film world. So that's what we've been doing. We've been doing it for ReelTime's been running for a year, and previously, my colleague and I were part of Share My Telly Job, which was more of a kind of campaign group, also looking at job sharing.
Fantastic. And I mean, this industry is probably, it's regarded as a very tough one. So that is a challenge. That is a challenge. We'll get further into that in a second. Maybe, Sinead, I neglected to say that, you're a mentor with
Yes.
Minding Creative Minds. Maybe
Yes.
tell us about that.
Okay, so which is kind of the reason I'm here today is representing Minding Creative Minds. So yeah, I've worked in the industry for about 25 years and I would have started in, as an assistant director, runner, worked in post houses, did everything. Okay. So basically, I think Minding Creative Minds started about 2 or 3 years ago, and it is it's kind of like a company that's been set up in Dublin, and it's for the whole of Ireland, and it provides mentoring for creatives in all industries. Now, I would kind of represent the film end of the industry. So what I do for Minding Creative Minds is that I mentor. And the mentoring that they offer is like they offer 3 sessions plus an introductory session, and it is free. And I think this is the biggest thing that everybody needs to know. It's a funded project. So I think that after working in the industry for 25 years, it's kind of time to give back. So everybody who's a mentor at Minding Creative Minds has extensive, experiencing their own end of the industry, and the one-on-one mentoring is something that has really, really worked. We do get a lot of people from post, and I'll get into that later. They also do tutorials. They do loads of other things. They have a 24 hotline, 24-hour hotline. And I would do a lot of workshops, a lot of tutorials. Some of them are very specific to the industry, which would be, you know, documentary, pitching a documentary, that kind of thing. And the others would be kind of like building, you know, resilience. We kind of have these things called building resilience for a world of rejection, because I think that's a lot of what the industry is about. Do you know what I mean? It's like the difficulty of that. So that's really it. I mean, I would just advise anybody who's listening today who's feeling, and this is promoting Winding Creative Minds, but I'm also promoting it for creatives. Like, it's this amazing thing. I wish it had been there when I was starting out in the industry. So they take in candidates about, I think it's 3 times a year. The actual thing isn't open. I think it opens again in January. So log on to Minding Creative Minds, and, you know, if you're interested in getting mentored, it's free. It's you know, other places charge, but this is free.
That's amazing. And I think, you know, I'm coming up to, I looked it up earlier, I'm coming up to 25 years in the industry as well now. And you know, when we started out, it was really kind of, you know, get on with it. You had to be tough. You know, and I suppose it's very timely we're talking about this, because people are so much more aware now about mental health and minding each other. And maybe on that, Michelle, maybe tell us a little bit more maybe about remote working and job sharing.
Absolutely. I mean, as you say, it is very timely. You know, in the UK, we have the Film and TV charity who have done a number of surveys called the Looking Glass surveys, which you might have seen, which is kind of really highlighting the kind of mental health crisis that we have in our industry. And I think particularly, you know, coming from years of having to be, you know, survival of the fittest and having to be the toughest and not show weakness, and, you know, that freelancer lifestyle of sort of feast and famine all kind of contributes to kind of quite a poor working conditions, really, quite often, that I think we all kind of have been through, coming up through the noughties and beyond. And so off the back, obviously, so sort of off the back of all of that, and I was particularly motivated by having my kids and finding it really hard to get any kind of balance, being able to keep my career going and keep my family going, and realizing that, you know, we were losing so much talent to the fact that, you know, it's really hard to do those really crazy long hours when you've got any other kind of commitments. It's also really very hard to look after your physical or your mental health when you're doing those crazy hours. So we started looking at, like, okay, come on, there has to be some way of getting some kind of flexible working. And I was lucky enough to work part-time when I had my kids. I went back to working as a casting producer. But really, it just meant working for free 1 day a week. So it wasn't really, I would say, particularly restful. And so we sort of looked at job sharing, but also, obviously, since COVID, remote working from home has become, you know, something that we were kind of forced to do. And now we're all kind of desperately hanging on to and trying to resist being dragged back full time into a edit suite or an office. And I think there are lots of amazing benefits that have come from, you know, working from home. COVID obviously was an awful time for many of us, but this kind of being able to kind of push that technology forward, being able to test it really thoroughly because we had no choice, and proving that, you know, you can run an edit from your shed, you know, really kind of allowed us to kind of test it and improve it. And I think what's kind of come out of that is, you know, has been a greater kind of inclusivity. You know, for years, parents were told they couldn't work from home if they worked in post, or disabled people, or anybody who lived far out of, you know, in London, anyone who lived sort of 2 hours away from Soho. It was a nightmare. And suddenly, you know, you're opening up this world of post to all sorts of people by allowing them to work from home. Now, I don't think it's I know you work from home, Joe. I think you're a big fan of that. I think it's one tool, it's one option. I don't always think it's necessarily perfect, and maybe that's something we can come back to later. But I I think, being able to combine a number of tools and options and giving people choice means that, we're allowing people to work in a way that works for their own commitments, that allows them to look after their own health.
Yeah, and I think it's about flexibility, isn't it? To me, COVID was one of the best things that ever happened. It was great. I finally got to work from home, and be with the kids and be with the dog and have that ability to, rather than having meetings about, when you're allowed to go to the dentist and you'll have to work back these hours. And, it was very liberating to finally do things on our own terms. But I think it's also presented challenges for people as well, being stuck at home, and that kind of return back to work, that's challenging as well. So maybe Sinead, I'm sure you've come across that.
It's a really interesting question, Joe. And it's also kind of like, I am a person who also works from home. Also, if I'm posting, I go into a post house, all that kind of thing. So I understand the dynamics of the advantages of working from home are huge. There's no question about that. I mean, I never do an offline edit in a post house anymore, which is wonderful. I don't have to travel into town. I don't have to travel to London. I don't have to travel anywhere. I do it from home with my editor, and it all works really well. I've done it on about 3 projects now. I've done it on so many promos. It all works absolutely perfectly. The downside is that, and this is what I think it is, and it often affects the younger people coming into the industry, is that there's nobody kind of, I suppose, monitoring the situation. And what we would see at Minding Creative Minds is I would mentor a lot of people, especially offline editors, and they're burning out at an incredibly young age. And it's because they feel they need to put all these hours in. Like, we're talking 16, 20 hours a day kind of thing, during periods of very heavy work. Now, those days are kind of gone in a post house, and those things need to be monitored. Like on a film set nowadays, if it seems to be happening on the film sets, where basically, and I think this has a lot to do with the advent of the Me Too movement, that brought in naturally a lot of regulation on sets, okay? And I think other regulations came in about mental health, about health in general. Like, if you're sick, you go home. If you're sick, you're replaced. If you're sick, you get paid. So all these kind of pressures, if you're sick, you're not at risk of losing your job. And I don't know whether that's quite seeped into the post industry yet. Do you know what I mean? And I think that it's kind of like where Michelle is, and she's right, is talking about all the positives of the industry. I suppose from mentoring, and I get the positives of the industry, but I'm also of an age where I can say no. No, I'm not doing that. I'm also the director, so I can say no. And I think a lot of younger editors are being taken advantage of. And I think this is what you talk about, the burnout. And they have to monitor themselves, because at the end of the day, and this is what Minding Creative Minds is about as well. And this is what I would be about. It's like, over the 25 years that I worked in the industry, so many of my friends burnt out of the industry. So many of them had to leave because they had children. And Michelle, I'll talk to you later about raising films and other companies that are starting in Ireland that she's very much part of. I'm not at that stage of my life anymore, but when I was editing, like maybe my 3rd documentary, I had to bring my child in 4 days after I had her, and I was breastfeeding in the offline. I mean, it was nuts, but that's the way it was. Like, there was just no monitoring. So it's good to know that all that's coming in. But what I'm very interested in is, like, at this point, is making sure that the younger editors who are coming up are minding themselves, minding their mental health, and not heading towards burnout because they feel that they're not doing enough.
There's such pressure, isn't there? I think, there's always been pressure to show that you can say yes. That was a classic thing. What do you do if you want to get into TV or film? You say yes to everything, take everything on, be the first one in, last one out, all that kind of thing. And I think there's a couple of things there. So I think if you're doing that and you're working from home, there's no division. There's no one to say, go home now. There's no, you get up, your computer's probably in your bedroom. You're just there going, and so I think that can be hard. I think also the lack of camaraderie, literally somebody physically next to you saying you need to go home. It can be quite isolating as well. So I think that's a really good point that you've made there, Sinead. And so I think it's about having a kind of a range of options, isn't it, to kind of support people and let people know that there are these options available to them.
I think as well, kind of smartphones play into this a lot as well. It's impossible to get away from the messages and the WhatsApp messages. And one of the best decisions I made about 2 years ago was work phone, personal phone, and dividing those two. And the work phone stays with the edit suite, and I step away. It stays there for the evening until the next morning. And I suppose on that, do you think companies could kind of foster better communication and management of people in remote environments or remote workflows?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of them you've said right there, is being really disciplined about when, just because you can send somebody an email at midnight doesn't mean you should. And even if you are available to, if you're wide awake and you want to write that email, you can do a delayed send, right? So it comes through at 8 o'clock the next morning. Like, don't be the boss that's, badgering your young, assistant editor at 2 a.m. It's really super uncool. It's about having really kind of strong boundaries. And I think that comes from the top, actually. I think it comes from, workplaces having really strong policies on flexible working. It's one of the things that, we're putting together now is, these, if you want to work flexibly, if you want to work from home, if you want to job share, these are the ways that, we allow it. And this is how you should manage people who are doing it. It's just making it really, really clear. So I think that is definitely number one. But I think also, just because somebody is out of sight, it's very easy for them to become out of mind. And I think it's just being aware, being considerate, and fostering those bonds with people working remotely that you would otherwise maybe have around the coffee machine or in the kitchen in the edit suite, actually kind of going, actually, those people still need to be, they're part of my team. How do we build that community with them?
Yeah, I think it's that those casual conversations that are often missed, over a Zoom call or over email, particularly. So I think remotely, when feedback's coming in, it's always good to pick up the phone as well, to get to help convey the tone of what you're.
And the text there, right? Look at us. We're all. I mean, I'm in the UK. The text there to be able to have a face-to-face conversation. And I think quite often people, when they are anti-flexible working, they're quite sort of they romanticize the conversations around the water cooler, which are 99% a load of old rubbish and like a waste of time, right? So I think, I think there is we've got to be careful not to kind of think how essential those kind of chats are. But I think, as you're right, it's how you have to actively maintain that human connection.
Absolutely.
That's something I would agree with. And just coming in and from the point of view, because sometimes I think, you're not always going to get that boss. A lot of the time, you're going to get the boss who will turn a blind eye to the amount of hours that you're working. And as you say, that needs to be fostered in the industry, very much so, like it was in the industry on film sets. But a lot of that was fostered in because people are forced to do it. Do you know what I mean? And you would know that, I think, from raising film, that you're kind of like it's almost like you have to sell the idea to somebody. I think in the meantime, and I would say this to any editor, as a director, if I have an editor who sets boundaries, I don't lose any respect for them. I'm like, okay, that's completely fair enough. Like, I just recently worked with an editor who was a dad, and he said, I never ever work weekends. I never work after 6 o'clock. And I start at 9 o'clock in the morning. And now, I mean, he did say, which is the same as any project, in the last week, if we need to go till midnight every night, I'll do it. Do you know what I mean? Because we all know what the final rush is. But, it's a 16-week edit. And if you did that every day for 16 weeks, by the end of it, what use is he to the project? Do you know what I mean? So, and he's older and he's very experienced. And they're the rules. Now, if he had turned around and said to me, look, I much prefer working from 12 until 12, I'm single, I don't have anything going on, I'd be happy too. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's at the end of the day, I think as an editor, don't be in fear, or somebody who's working remotely in post, don't be in fear of setting your boundaries. As long as they're reasonable boundaries, and as long as the reality is that you're going to work better if you work an 8 or a 9 hour day and have a rest. That's the reality. You might get 2 great days. I mean, we all do it. We all have deadlines. We might get 2 great days, burst of energy where you can kind of hammer it all out. I always save that to the end of my job. Do you know what I mean? I know this is coming. There's no point in doing it in the middle of the job or you just collapse, you know? So I think learning to set those boundaries is just try it once and see if it works. Do you know what I mean? You'd be surprised how quickly people cotton on to you just setting your boundaries. And once you have those boundaries in place, you're heading for a much better life. And Joe, I love your idea of the work phone. I think everybody who has got because you only need to pick up a cheap old phone, don't you?
That's it. Yeah, it's just a cheap pay as you go.
I'll be advising my mentees from now on, get a work phone.
This is it. And also, there have been people I've worked with who've broken that barrier. They've gone from colleague to friend, so they get the personal number, there's no work chat on it, but that means you're in the inner circle then,
I think there's also an app you can have on your phone that allows you to have 2 numbers on one phone actually, and to meet.
Oh, I love it.
So yeah, I think that somebody was telling me about that the other day. So that's
also one other thing I would say is actually, and this is quite important too, and this is from you, it's again kind of like trying to, as the person who, should we say, is not in the position of power, trying to kind of set the boundaries, is never send an email yourself outside of working hours, because you're just opening the door. You know what I mean? Like, I time every email. I'm like you, like I'll be writing them at 10 o'clock at night, Michelle, and I have them all timed to go at 6 o'clock in the morning when I'm asleep. Everybody thinking, oh, Sinead, she's such a hard worker. She's up at 6 in the morning. They all go out at 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning or 8. Do you know what I mean? And so they're on somebody's desk in the morning and not at night, because that's me sending an email to somebody at 10 o'clock at night is going to give them a bad night's sleep.
Yeah, and I think it's okay as well over time for those boundaries to change as well as you grow and you grow up. I used to be much more of a night owl, and then I had kids, and you change as well, and it's just about communicating where those boundaries. Like the one that's sort of always stuck is lunch is sacrosanct. I always have lunch. You won't get a decent afternoon and early evening out of me if I don't get to have a lunch break. That's that has to happen. And maybe we've mentioned raising film a couple of times now, and parents. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So Raising Films in the UK were kind of part of the inspiration for when we set up Share My Telly Job. They're an organisation who are, their reason to be is keeping parents in their careers, keeping parents in film. And if you go on their site, they've got a whole load of resources. They have a sort of a Raising Films badge or for productions that work in a kind of ethical, supportive way. And they also have now Raising Films IE, who we recently worked with them and Screen Academies Ireland to do a first job sharing program in Ireland, and they're taking the learnings from that training and they are putting together resources and building on that. So if anybody is interested, do have a look at I think actually I think maybe I sent them to you, Joe. There is a link to their resources. I think maybe we can put them in the chat. I can go and find it in a minute and put it in. So do have a look and see what the work that Screen Academies Ireland are doing and Raising Films are doing. There's lots of support there, lots of case studies, and it's really important, because I think it's, we do lose anybody with caring commitments, whether that's for your own children or for your parents. We lose them from the industry, and these are people who are mid-career, loads of experience. These are people we shouldn't be losing, and that's definitely why we set up Share My Telly Job. But actually, I think we've touched on it a little bit, but the reasons. I don't think you need to have a reason to justify why you want to work flexibly from home or to job share, but the reasons have certainly changed or have developed definitely since COVID, and certainly since the strikes. We're getting a lot more, not just mums, we're getting dads, we're getting a lot of editors with sciatica who need to do a Pilates lesson on a Thursday. We're getting lots of people who don't want to put all their eggs in the TV and film basket because it's been so up and down recently. They want to have a side hustle going on, or they want to write their own screenplay or whatever it is. So we've got lots of reasons why people want to look after their mental health. People have burnt out. I mean, I've lost count of the amount of people who say, I fell asleep on the wheel coming back from the edit suite or coming back from set. So there's lots of reasons why people want flexible working. And I think the myth was always that it was a sort of a charitable thing to do for the mummies, when actually it's now changing to actually flexible working, whether that is working from home or job sharing, is a great source of creativity and a great source of energy, of problem solving, and of the ability to keep, you know, really respected, experienced people in the industry. And that's what's really exciting about it.
Yeah, I love that you kind of said there that people don't need a reason as
No,
well.
they shouldn't have
You
to
know,
justify it, right?
yeah, that's it. You know, it's could be someone's choice not to have children, and you know, they don't need to give you that reason. You know, that's
Right. I've got a production manager who likes to ride her horse on a Thursday and Friday. I mean, living the dream, and why not?
that's it. Yeah, it could be anything, couldn't it? And it's not you know, you don't have to justify.
And it doesn't mean you're less committed either. And in fact, I would say, you know, if you are willing to kind of look into different ways that you can keep your career going, you'd almost say you're more committed, you know, you really want to make it work. But it all comes down to, I think, with any of these options, and I think, Sinead, you touched on it a little bit, is kind of putting the prep in, like working out how you're going to do it, not just coming to your boss with a problem, saying, actually, you know, I'd like to work from home. This is how I see it's going to work, or I'd like to job share. This is how I'd like to see it work. So I think, you know, it's about kind of coming with a fully made plan that you can then present and then tweak and change, as you say, Joe, you know, change as your career goes on. But yeah, I think it's definitely kind of getting that prep in first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like anything, it's hard to shift things in the industry. But I think that, you know, I think a lot of people, I think a lot of women were lost out of the industry over the years due to having babies.
Oh yeah.
Because you literally can't work those long hours. I mean, the whole job sharing thing is such a great idea. And I think that what it does is that, I mean, I love hearing about this. And I think congratulations, Michelle, the work that you're doing is amazing. And I'm so delighted to hear that it's coming in Ireland. Because at the end of the day, the industry, if they're really smart about it, they just go, okay, this person may be only gone job sharing for a couple of years. Do you know what I mean? And then they'll fully come back into the industry. There's so many advantages to it. It's not just about like easing people's, it's also about practicalities. Do you know what I mean? If you're a young mom, maybe you want to be at home for a year, but maybe you can't afford to not work at all. Maybe you want a job share. So I think it's very interesting territory that we're getting in. And I think what the wonderful thing about it is that we're not going to lose. I mean, thinking of young female editors and stuff like that, it's such a difficult game to stay in once you're a mom. And I think this is what's really interesting. And I have to say, in the last short that we did, we kind of brought in the raising film thing that we did, or on the short, and we provided babysitters for anybody who needed them. And it's not that much out of the budget. It's such an easy thing to do. And from that, not only are you getting a kind of a less stressed cast or crew member, you're also just providing goodwill. You know what I mean? You're making people feel included, whereas there would have been kind of an alienation to these ideas before. Whereas now it's kind of like, hey, this is actually good for the industry.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe Michelle, because you know, I think maybe this is partly my kind of stern kind of background that I had of being dragged through. To me, job sharing, you know, it just feels like alarm bells. Like, how it just gives me anxiety. How would I hand over an edit? How would it work with edit producers? You know, maybe talk us through the practicalities of how it might work in post-production.
Absolutely. So so with my own background, obviously in unscripted, and now working a lot more with high-end TV drama, we've placed job sharers. We've had job sharers working in all sorts of roles. So in unscripted, we've had job sharing editors and edit producers. In scripted, we've had job sharing editors. We've had first A's. We've had post-production coordinators, supervisors. So it's absolutely possible, first of all, Joe. So don't panic. There is precedent and it works really well. And sort of the most common way for people to job share. So, Joe, if you and I were going to job share, maybe you'd work every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I'd work every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And we'd have the Wednesday together. That'd be a great day for us to have team meetings with the director, with the producer, you know, kind of look at each other's footage, kind of work out what we're doing. As editors, you know, it's our decision we'd come up with a plan beforehand, before pitching ourselves as a pair, to say, okay, maybe we'll have our own episodes that we'll look after, but we'll look after each other. We'll kind of make sure that we're over each other's footage so we can step in. Or we might say we're going to be over everything and we'll do a proper job share. We'll share everything and we'll make sure that we're both over everything. You know, I've had people do week on, week off with a handover day on a Friday. I've had people split the day. There's lots of different ways that we can do it. And the benefits, I think, that come with job sharing, particularly in the edit, is that ability to step away. You know, so often I think when you're in the edit, you know, you're in your dark room and the pressure is huge because everything's obviously been pushed right to the end, and suddenly there's no budget and the time's gone out the window and it's a real kick bollock scramble and everybody's very stressed. So actually being able to step away. If we were splitting the week, Joe, you'd be able to go home and be at home on the Thursday and Friday. You'd be able to do your Pilates class, look after your back from sitting down in the chair all day. And while you're sitting there, or maybe while you're brushing your teeth, suddenly, bing, your brain's relaxed and you're able to see the wood for the trees and you go, that's how that scene works. Got it. And the brilliance that comes with job sharing is having not only double the experience, so between us, over 40 years of experience, but being able to problem solve together, and being able to kind of go, God, Joe, you know, I just can't make this scene work. I'm not sure about this performance. What do you think? And you go, well, hang on a minute. Do you remember there's that? What about that take? And oh yeah, I'd totally forgotten about it. Let's go back. And do you know what I mean? Or it's all about being able to share. And that's something that we so rarely have in our industry. We're so kind of in our own, you know, we're bred to compete, really, aren't we? So actually having somebody that you can be vulnerable with and go, I just can't get this to work, without it being in front of the director and making you feel very like, oh God, I'm going to lose my job. Having somebody who's your teammate, one, is great for the product, but also how wonderful for your mental health to have somebody who's on your side, that you can go, I can't make this work. And especially, you know, for somebody, let's say for a parent, I mean, my God, when I was working, when I had my kids, my second kid didn't sleep for 3 years. I was like a drunk driver. You know, I was so tired. I couldn't remember anything, but I was still good at my job. But I would have loved to have been able to phone up Joe and go, Joe, am I going mad? But didn't we say in this meeting this? And now they're saying that. Is it me? Or do you know what I mean? So you've got that peer-to-peer support, which is so great when it comes to supporting mental health, as well as real time off, where your job share partner has it and you're not getting phone calls. I think that's really important. But particularly for the edit, yeah, we've seen it work really well in all those roles. If you're like a post-production supervisor, you might be over a number of productions. Just having that kind of job share partner to help you manage all of that, really, really helpful. And then, yeah, as I say, for the editor, just helpful to be able to step back, but also to have somebody to have another pair of eyes on your work is really helpful.
I'm sold. Yeah, that sounds like an ideal way of working.
Next week.
To have someone, you know, who essentially has your back all the time and is a creative partner as well. That sounds fantastic.
That's when it's working at its very best, when you're not just sharing by time, you're sharing by skills, by expertise, by preference. That's when it gets really exciting. But of course, that all relies on finding the right partner. You know, and that's also takes work. So I kind of always feel a little bit like a fraud when I talk about job sharing, because as a concept, it's pretty simple, right? You just split the week and both do the same job. But actually, the devil's in the details, and it's finding somebody in a partner that complements your skill set, that fills your skills gaps, that's at the same level of experience. I think that's really key, because you have to have complete trust in your partner that they are as good as you, and that when you walk away, they're going to have it, right? Yeah. And quite often I'll get approached by, you know, HODs or heads of production saying, you know, we want to use job sharing as a way of bringing somebody up, you know, maybe a less experienced person with a more experienced person. And I always kind of caution against that a little bit, because I think when the experience levels are skewed, it can work, but that's not a job share. That's a mentoring situation. Because in that situation, when you have somebody who is much more experienced than the other person, everyone just waits for that person to come in. They end up doing the majority of the work. Everybody waits for that person to make the decision. And then the less experienced person is like, what am I, admin support? And that's when you get like, you get resentment building up there. So I think for anybody who's listening and is thinking, gosh, who could I job share with? Have a think about somebody whose work you admire, who you like the way they work, you like their values, but also who's at the same level as you. It could be experience of different genres. I think that's really helpful to have somebody who's done a lot of this style and I've done a lot of this style. So together we're like a super editor, but they have to be as good as you. That's what I would say.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm still sold.
Good.
Awesome. Sinead, what are your kind of thoughts on that? Because I think, we don't really have this in Ireland as much. I've certainly not seen it in post here, really.
I think it would be amazing. I mean, I think job sharing sounds incredible. It's not something I see, but I think in every department. Like, I know so many people who would love to job share. And I'm already seeing people I'm already going to phone 2 friends of mine and say, you could job share with each other, because they both kind of like want shorter hours. I mean, the reality is that filming, work in film and TV is very, very long hours compared to other jobs. And often, there are people who would much rather be working a 2 or a 3 day week, which isn't really possible at the moment. That doesn't really go on. I think it's a terrific idea. I don't think it's for everybody. I would know a lot of editors that just wouldn't do it. But I think it's something that it's kind of like a proof of concept. It's almost like you've proved it, Michelle, over in the UK. You've proved that it works. I think you'd have to kind of get that going in Ireland, but I certainly think that it's something for me, I think for a couple of reasons why it would really work is because, one, I think because of young families, but also people get to a stage in life. And I totally agree with Michelle, where, you've kind of had years of experience and maybe you want to go off and write that script you never wrote. Maybe you want to go and write that book. Maybe you just want to go to planet, whatever. But often with creative people who work in the industry, they may have left something behind, like a dream behind, that they now want to focus on. So I think it's a really interesting prospect, and I'm delighted to hear that it's happening. With regards to mental health, of course it will help. I mean, if we're kind of drawing on the stuff that Michelle said and taking the job sharing away, like, I think everything that you're saying, Michelle, is so important for mental health anyway. It's having the ability to step away. Like, if I'm writing, it's never while I'm writing the great idea comes. It's when I'm out in the walk. You know what I mean? It's when I go off for a half an hour, or as you say, at night you wake up. And I think there'll be very few editors, writers, directors, producers who wouldn't agree with that. The light bulbs moments come when you're actually more relaxed. Do you know what I mean? So I think that I would, like, at this stage of the game, I'd be advocating for, if you want longevity in your career, set boundaries for yourself, because this is an industry that can eat you up and will happily do so and spit you out. Sorry to be harsh, but this is the reality of the world that we live in. And once you set those boundaries and kind of like, people can do things different ways. You can maybe work your arse off for 3 months and go to Thailand for 2 months. Do you know what I mean? That works too. But as long as you look after yourself and set those boundaries, as Joe said, there needs to be flexibility. You can change those boundaries throughout your career. But if you love your career is only going to last and really do well if you mind yourself, because everybody, no matter who you are, will burn out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about making it sustainable, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's about making it sustainable. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and all that.
Yeah, I also think the film industry is quite a strange industry in the sense that, like, there's a do or die attitude all the time, which is really quite funny. Like, now that I'm a bit older, I kind of look at that and laugh a bit, because I'm kind of like, I live in a house where I work in film, my husband works in film, he's a DAP, and he comes home and he goes, something dreadful happened on set, and it's like, and I'm like, so what? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, did anybody die? So it's kind of like, and that is kind of infiltrated into everybody in the industry, no matter what area you're in, whether you're in post, whether you're in production, whether you're in prep, whether you're in, factual drama, whatever. It's a do or die kind of a thing. Like, if this doesn't happen, and everybody kind of, it's like a kind of like the crucible where everybody joins in on the panic. And in reality, that needs to be controlled a bit more. I think it's controlled much more than it used to be, much more controlled. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to set your own boundaries. The editors that I've seen survive the business are calm, collected, and set their own boundaries.
Mm.
Joe, are you all of them?
I can be. Yeah, I think it's. I think for me growing up, my mother was a nurse. My brothers and sisters all work in healthcare or the police. So I would come home complaining about stuff that happened in the edit, and they'd be like, "Well, actually, this happened at the hospital today." And that really puts things in perspective. And I think that's why it's important as well to sometimes step outside of our industry. Not just to get inspiration, but to put things in perspective as well.
Oh.
And I think if you have space for kind of volunteering in your life, that's a very good outlet. And kind of job sharing obviously could help you free up the time to do something like that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, what I would say is, yeah, we're not, I too roll my eyes sometimes, Sinead. We're not saving lives. We're just it's just telly. But that is not to minimize that when you are working in telly, the hours are horrendous. The stress is horrendous. The fatigue is awful. The bullying and harassment culture that comes from being stressed and fatigued, that comes from unrealistic schedules, unrealistic budgets, that's real, so, that is not. So it's really important that until we can sort out these working hours, that we kind of try and find other tools, and which job sharing is one, but to be able to manage the stress, to manage the fatigue, so that we can, keep our mental health and our physical health. I was talking to a woman, she was in her 50s, she's devoted her life to film and TV. She's done what we've all done, missed family holidays, missed weddings, missed funerals to devote herself to it. She hasn't got a family, she's always been about her career. Great. She's got a lovely house, but she's sort of in her mid-50s now. She says, I haven't cooked a homemade meal for years. I haven't done proper exercise, gone to the gym. I need to decorate my house. I live on set eating craft services, rubbish food and not exercising. And I'm 55. I need to start looking after myself now. I can't carry on like this. And there is a point, where you've got all this amazing experience and knowledge, but you just don't want to work 15-hour days. You want to be able to kind of manage that and stop it from taking a toll on your mental health. So I think it's really important to kind of say, job sharing is great for getting perspective, for sure, but also that, that the pressures that people are under are real. So it's about kind of working out what you can build in, and whether that's working from home or job sharing or another thing. Or, it's definitely speaking to Minding Creative Minds and having, well-being facilitators and that kind of thing on your set or in your offices.
Yeah, I think another thing that that we're more aware of now is neurodivergency as well. So, back 20 years ago, that really wasn't as openly discussed in the way it is now. So maybe talk to us, maybe Sinead, about how companies can foster kind of inclusivity around neurodivergency.
Yeah, I have to say neurodivergency is something that was, it's a big focus in Minding Creative Minds, because a lot of the people who come from mentoring would have had some form of a diagnosis. And a diagnosis of ADHD or whatever it might be can often be a benefit in jobs. You know what I mean? Like being an editor where the hours and focus are really needed, but it can often be to the detriment of the employee, the editor. So managing that within companies is, look, it's all about taking responsibility, really and truly. Like the companies, I suppose the people at the top, it's all about not taking advantage. I also think that the climate has changed. So I think that, certainly people I would be mentoring, I would just say, well, that's ridiculous. Now, I'm a director. I've worked with editors for 25 years. I know what's ridiculous and I know what's not ridiculous. So I understand at the end of an edit, you need to put in 16 hours a day to get that over the line. That's to everybody's benefit, including the editor, because they want a brilliant film. But that's not to anybody's benefit if it goes on all the way through. So it's kind of like, I think that people often don't realize that there is a possibility of, and I've said it before, setting their own boundaries. And, you know, the responsibility, it's hard. I mean, it's hard, I think, in post because of the whole remote thing. People are separated from each other. And Michelle brought this up before. And like on set, there is kind of these guidelines. There's very strict guidelines on set about mental health, racism, everything. You know what I mean? So I'm not. The companies do need to step up, and I think when you know you've got somebody who's working too long hours, you need to step in and say it. But that's down to the individual often. It's often down to the person and what the type of person they are at the top. I also think that, like, you know, I think that people need to consider themselves a business. Like I consider myself a creative, but primarily I see myself as a business. Like this is how I make my income, you know, and I have several different jobs: director, producer, writer, mentor, whatever. And I just make sure that I actually just allocate a certain amount of hours to each. But I think that you need to see yourself as kind of a new car. It's going to get really wrecked if you keep on driving it. Do you know what I mean? And you know, because sorry,
you'll depreciate in value quite quickly if you're.
Yes, you will depreciate in value when you can't work anymore because you've.
I go with the car analogy there.
But I do think that I think that it's important. Like I would always be about take responsibility yourself, because I think at the end of the day it's hard, you know. It's, you know, there's other people like Michelle who can go to the companies, the heads of companies, and that's all brilliant work that you're doing. But as an individual, and you don't have that kind of power at this moment in time, you know, you need to set those boundaries. You need to decide, you need to put a value on yourself. And that's what I would be doing when I'm mentoring. I'm saying, well, who are you? What do you want? How long do you want to be in this industry? 25 years? You keep working the way you're working and you won't be in it for more than another year. Do you know what I mean? And
Really
make people understand what they're physically and mentally putting themselves through. And they're also allow people to know there are other ways, you know. Maybe you're working with the wrong director. Maybe you're working with the wrong company. We are in a feast of an industry. There's no famine at the moment in this world. You can move on to another company. So think about all these things.
It's important though, Sinead. It's really, I'm going to push you a little bit just because I think it's great. I think at a certain level, you can set your own boundaries and you can push back. But if you're just coming in, there's such pressure, you know, and you know, we spoke about this, right? New entrants, you don't feel like you have that agency to kind of say no, or I have to stop. So I think as you were coming back to the, you know, what you were saying at the beginning, you know, I think it has to also come from the top. If you are running a company, you have to have, well, it's what I push companies to do, is to have a responsibility for your workers, and whether, you know, and whether that is having a flexible working policy or a managing neurodivergent people policy or a working hours policy. You know, you have to, I think in our industry, people will work every hour to secure their job. You know, people will work 15 hours a day every single day, and they will burn out. They do. We see it all the time. And it's, you know, because we love our jobs and because we know that we're so lucky. You know, we're built on it. The industry runs on gratitude. We're so lucky to have this job that we want to, you know, work. So, you know, it's also pushing the companies to kind of go, you know, you have this great motivated workforce who are willing to, you know, to not, you know, to leave in the middle of their holiday, to, you know, not go to their granddad's funeral in order to work for you. But you also need to look after them and be responsible for them. So it's both, isn't it?
Oh, totally, both. I mean, you see, I suppose the people I'm mentoring they're not the powerful people. Do you know what I mean? So I'm giving them ways to support themselves. I mean, I actually was thinking when I was reading all the material that both of you sent through, I was wondering, like, is there an editors union? Like, you know, the way there's kind of like we have, like you've Raising Films, like we would have kind of like women in film and TV. We campaign to Screen Ireland all the time about 50-50 for funding, 50-50 for jobs, 50-50. Is there anybody in Ireland who campaigns for people who work in post-production, who says, like, we need to sort out the hours that is working? And I suppose that's actually a question for Joe, because I just don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose maybe not as strong as what we might have in the UK, but we have the ISE here, the Irish Screen Editors, which is a guild,
Yeah.
who are doing great work. Um, but yeah, it is something that's, I think, very tough, especially when people are starting out. It's hard to find that strength, Sinead, to say no, these are my boundaries, because it's so expected, and also you're at the age where you can, not that it's right, but you can take it a little bit more, and it's kind of expected and it's part of the culture. So it's kind of, almost to Michelle's point, there needs to be a huge shift in the industry, the way we kind of treat our weakest, treat the newest people coming into the industry, that we need to mind them as well. The responsibility is on us when we're bringing people into the industry.
Yeah, yeah. And also make people feel valued. I think it's really important to make every person that works for you feel really valued, and also congratulate them for their work, thank them for their hours, and that's something that's kind of missing in the industry. It's so much more present than it used to be. Like, I can really see that, but it's something that we need a bit more of, just a bit more kindness, a bit more empathy towards people. Sorry, Michelle, I interrupted you.
No, that's right. No, you're absolutely right. I think that's great. Joe, I've just seen the time, Joe.
I know. Apologies.
That's great.
It's
I'm
it's
apologies
such.
for you.
I'm just having a great time chatting to you both. Maybe we'll just do one question and then maybe a couple of final thoughts. So Grania has made a comment here that it's a great conversation. Thanks very much. And just thinking about stress, particularly about there's not enough time, and that this needs to be a serious consideration from the top down. And I think we're all feeling that. And I've seen it a lot over the last 20 years in the duration we have to edit something. It used to be weeks and weeks and weeks to cut different TV shows. Now it's expected. I was talking to Julian last night. 5 weeks to turn around a drama. It's as expected. I did a Channel 4 thing with him a couple of years ago. I think we did it in about 3 weeks. And that was 2 TV 1 hours. Just crazy. And that's just become more and more normal. And I suppose I don't know if there's any coming back from it now. It's a budgetary thing, and it's that we've all worked very hard to allow it to happen.
Well, we have worked very, very hard. The tech is there more and more to allow things to be very efficient, but we are burning out, and it's every time you get a new series, a series recommissioned, it's for half the budget and in half the time, and there needs to be pushback, and whether that's through the unions or from us collective action. I think it's always really important. And if you're given a schedule as an HOD to kind of go, this or a budget, this is not realistic, to kind of voice it rather than just kind of shut up and try and do your best to make it happen. We're all miracle workers. But things like, as I said, things like job sharing is not a solution. It's a tool to kind of go, actually, we don't have enough time. You're both going to be working, you're going to be working crazy hours, split the week, share the burden of those hours is an idea. But yeah, no, I mean, broadcasters, studios, streamers, they need to be taking responsibility and actually having a really good look at, what they're asking their workers to do, which is exploitation, and there's that division, isn't there, between the people, the commissioners, and actually the people on the ground doing the work. And I think there needs to be greater communication of the effect of a crazy tight budget and schedule has on the people on the ground.
Absolutely. Any kind of final thoughts, Sinead?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this has been a really interesting chat, and it's good to hear about the options of possible job sharing, more job sharing coming into Ireland. I think that's amazing. And I think what just keeps coming up is this burnout thing, and people need to mind themselves. And I agree with Michelle and you. The collective action is often the only thing that can work in those scenarios. That's how Me Too came about. That's how mental health started being looked after on set. Neurodivergency, inclusion, all that kind of thing. So now maybe it's time to look after our post people a little bit better. And that's it, really. I mean, I think that there are resources out there, like Minding Creative Minds. So, anybody who's feeling the burnout, sign up and hopefully you'll get a mentor. It's free. Even that in itself is time away from work. And, as Joe and Michelle have said, like, take the time out. go do your Pilates, look after yourself. As I said earlier, we're all just machines really in the industry. So look after yourself, you know, service yourself. Is that it? When you go and service your car, make sure that you're just well looked after, I think, both physically and mentally.
And in the end, it makes business sense. You know, if I was talking to, it makes business sense to have a happy, healthy, diverse, inclusive workforce. That means you can tell better stories, more authentic stories. You know, it means that actually, you can, by building in this sort of support, you can support more diverse people to tell their stories. If it's just people who can work 15 hours a day non-stop, who have no commitments, you're going to get a very samey kind of person working and telling a very sort of samey kind of story. So we are creative people telling creative stories, which means we need to have a diversity of storyteller behind the scenes, for sure.
Absolutely. You reminded me once, years ago, when I was starting out in Soho, I used to ride a little Vespa into Soho from where I lived. I was working mad hours. I remember actually dozing off at Trafalgar Square and a black cab beeping behind me to kind of, come on, it's gone green. And and at the time I kind of laughed it off, and that's just the way. And I didn't think, it didn't even cross my mind to go to my manager and say, look, this is a bit crazy what we're doing here.
Yeah, I know. It's still happening. That's a story from however many years ago, but it's still happening, in all departments. But I think, I think quite often you're at the sharp end of it. You're at where all the pressures and the time constraints and the budgets all have like been squeezed, and then you have to fix everything. So, I think it's definitely worth investing in, looking at, and it works perfectly because generally you're in a set location, so you can put things in place. I think it's super important for post.
Yeah, absolutely. Fixing it in post.
Fix post.
Fixing it in post.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you both so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Sinead.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Joe. Lovely to meet you both.
Yeah, wishing you all the best.
Take care.
Take care.